Well, a sum of close to 22 billion. The period from March 2020 to June 2022. That's how much we're able to get as much as COVID-related funds are concerned. How did we spend that expenditure? And the latest special audit by the Auditor General on COVID expenditure is indicating we just didn't do well. We're speaking to a number of officials right here. And Dr. Kwame Siedu-Sapong is a research fellow, the Ghana Center for Democratic Development. He'll be joining us in the course of a conversation we're about to have. Linda Ofori-Kwafu, well known with Ghana Integrity Initiative. She is Executive Director. And already on stream is Edem Senanu, anti-corruption campaigner. And before we introduce Edem, Edem, good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
Yeah, great. But let's hear from the president. When he was being sworn in at the beginning of his first term, the 7th of January, 2017.
State coffers are not spoiled for the party that wins an election, but resources for the country's social and economic development. I shall protect the public purse by insisting on value for money in all transactions. Public service is just that, service and not an avenue for making money. Money is to be made in the private sector, not the public, and measures will be put in place to ensure this. We must create wealth and restore happiness to our nation. We can only do this when we have an educated and skilled population that is capable of competing in the global economy. We must expand our horizons and embrace science and technology as critical tools for our development. We believe that the business of government is to govern. Ours is to set fair rules. We will provide vision and direction and shine the light down the path of our entrepreneurs and farmers.
And here we are. Mr. Edem Senanu, good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
Yeah, great. So we're about to begin a conversation on the subject. I'm sure that also within the period you've had a lot of conversations on this latest special audits on COVID expenditure by the Auditor General's Department, or the Auditor General. But I would want you to tilt your piece, your device a bit closer to you so that the headroom at least is cut off just a bit, so that we just don't get only your head or your chest, but we try to get it well framed.
Looking better?
Yeah, looking better. All right. Now, if you take a look at the clip we just played, the 7th of January 2017, the president's own promises to the ordinary Ghanaian who voted him into office, and what the latest Auditor General's report is indicating about the COVID expenditures, almost to the tune of 22 billion gotten up to June 2022. What will be your summary observation?
A wanton disregard for systems and processes to deliver on the promise.
Now, within the content of the report, there has been blatant disregard to verifying, getting source documents for payments that have been made based on expenditure. It's a pattern that we've always reported, of course, reported by the Auditor General. But why is this, in relation to the expenditures on COVID, more serious or grievous?
It is of greater, concern because there was a specific purpose or objective of receiving these funds, which was to protect a community within the period of COVID relating to health issues. Now, to the extent that we cannot verify that these funds were applied as received judiciously to the objective, clearly it tells you that perhaps you have people who have just lined their pockets, haven't received these funds, and not delivered on what exactly they were supposed to do. It also tells you that the monitoring and tracking of these funds was very poorly done. And if you have spending officers, the question is that how come nobody was paying attention to demanding the necessary receipts, the necessary documentation, to the extent that an audit cannot establish whether services were provided, products were provided, receipts there. That's a major concern. It just tells you that, and this is just one sector, this is just the health sector. So it is very baffling as to how one cannot be able to track these documentations, especially when the people who were responsible are still in positions of trust.
And because you've been in the space for a very long time, anti-corruption, anti-graft, as usually we refer to it in the public space, the individuals, organizations who were audited, they had enough time to have responded to Auditor General or not?
Oh, yes. Typically, this is not done in a rush. You remember that when the audit report, the general audit report for 2021 was being laid, that's in 2022. Many of us were like, okay, where is the section on COVID? And the Auditor General said, well, it would take some time. Ideally, we should have concluded the intervention before, So they've taken some time to do this. And the individuals would have been given the opportunity to respond, in addition to if PAC takes it up and then invites them. Truth be told, once the Auditor General begins to say there are gaps with ABC, most of them will be substantive findings that, it means that individuals are not able to provide feedback on, and that's a shame.
Now, if you look at some of the itemized areas in the report regarding the expenditures, some of them blatantly flouting key regulations as far as the Public Financial Management Act is concerned. Ideally, the institutions and ministries or ministers who had oversight responsibility, what should have been their key roles?
Well, when you go borrowing and picking money, first of all, it is not your internally generated resources which are from the national cake, such that you should be more, as it were, sensitive to making sure that at the end of the day, the reporting on it is clear, the accountability is foremost on your mind, and that the systems will deliver on that. Having said that, the public sector is already structured to have a system of how you do procurement, the tendering, the requests, the screening down and selection, the vetting process, the award of who will supply, the determination of when supplies were provided, the recording of the quantities, etc. So with the system already in place, what the report is showing should not have happened, because it means that from the minister down to the key procuring officers, there is a system that exists from the minister to the chief director, to the directors in charge, to the procurement people, where you must be reporting at regular periods, typically not more than a quarter, on what has transpired within that space. So ordinarily, if the reports were being done with the various attachments of, okay, the process for procurement went through, this is a selected party, this is the contract that was given to the person, these are the milestones in terms of the quantities to be delivered at which periods, or it's a one-time delivery, this is the expected delivery date. There must be continuous reportage on it. And any minister who understands this would therefore be giving audience in their review meetings to take up the data, to have in the internal audit department taking a closer look at whether the documentation is tight, the supporting information is there. This should not have happened.
Now, if you go to the section or point 107 of the report, there's every indication that does state, and per the quote, general principles of insurance require that when an employer or organization purchases group life insurance policy to cover employees in case of death, accident, temporary or permanent disability, and critical illness, the employer organization may keep the master agreement, but the identified employee should receive certificate of coverage. Now, the response to that by the auditees was that because this was a group insurance, identifiable health personnel, the frontline who were captured, were not identified at the time of the group insurance. As a result of that, during the period of verification, when the auditing was being done, those individual documentation could not be provided. Is that tenable based on basic corporate governance processes?
No, it is not. If you go picking an insurance for a group of people, the cover covers the group, not in name, but also in terms of the persons. On a transactional basis, these persons would have aligned themselves, they would have been informed. If it were done on a normal basis, they may have even made contributions towards this group insurance cover. Once that transaction contractually is concluded, each of these individuals would be served some document indicating that you are covered by this insurance and the benefits and the obligations that you have. Unfortunately, in this instance, this did not happen. And I'm aware of some units, organizations that sought when some of their staff who they knew were covered by this. They tried to make claims, and they didn't get anything. They made every effort. They had been told that, look, we've taken this cover, it includes you. And so when they got affected by COVID or otherwise, they tried to follow up. None of them got a PERSWA. So it tells you that, once again, in normal parlance, we say, was this a 419 or what was going on? So that's also a major concern.
Okay. Again, I'm getting the headroom. So it means that you have to tilt it further down. That is your device. I don't know whether it's possible. But that said, there is a consistent abuse of funding within the public space. Who should be held responsible? Because if you look at Article 187, the Auditor General in 187B is allowed to do some surcharges. So who should be held responsible for some of these things?
Well, first of all, the people who are directly responsible for spending the money and who, for all extents and purposes, did not obtain the necessary documentation, as it were, to reconcile figures and to retire the amount spent, they become the first point of recourse, so the first set of people who ought to be held responsible, because you are trained to occupy that position, to deliver on the mandate with certain specifics you've been told to do. So you cannot expend money and not collect the receipts, or not, as it were, ensure that the goods have been delivered. So the spending officers, the service providers who have signed on to contracts and who have not delivered on it are also to be held responsible. Then up the chain, those who should have ensured that we don't have contracts that are not delivered on, or else taking administrative action to get some court processes initiated, triggered, to make sure that the good people of this country get value for money, they are also responsible, all the way up to the minister. And then we have the Auditor General, who is refusing to surcharge and gives us wonderful, voluminous reports, which are detailed and good. It tells you that there are lots of professionals there doing the work they ought to do. But the Auditor General must be minded that we expect him to go the further step of ensuring that monies that can be retrieved are retrieved. People who should be surcharged are being surcharged. Without that, he's also contributing to the loss to the state.
If you look at how the previous Auditor General, Daniel Domelevo, was castigated for surcharges that were undertaken, how do those actions then give the opportunity for the current Auditor General to marshal the confidence to be able to undertake this mandate very well, as indicated in 1877A?
Well, Mr. Daniel Domelevo serves as an important benchmark for us in civil society because, you know, he went along with the civil society organizations that went to seek the court permission to have this instituted. And he not just did that, he went ahead to make sure we retrieve sums. That began to bring some kind of bite. You know, we say Auditor General backs, but does not bite. And I mean, it was not that we didn't have the law. The law had always been there. Part of the impunity we see is simply because nobody is being held accountable. The examples of precedents being set of people being prosecuted, incarcerated are so few and far in between that people think that I can get away with it. Nothing will happen. We need a lot more examples of people being surcharged, prosecuted, named and shamed for us to get the traction in this fight. And so what Mr. Daniel Domelevo did as a very important benchmark for all of us, and unfortunately for Mr. Asiedu Johnson, is it Johnson Asiedu? He has a very strong shoes, big shoes to fill. And at the moment, many of us are not too excited that he's not cracking the whip the way Domelevo did, and that is in the best interest of this country.
Now, if you look at the way we've treated other audit reports or past audit reports, and this one, of course, is a special one, they just come before the Public Accounts Committee of Parliament. Of course, it doesn't have any prosecutorial powers subsequently, and so that is why the actions are being advocated for the surcharge. What then will happen to this based on your own experiences? If what your observation is, subsequently, who should take action beyond the Auditor General?
Well, like you pointed out, typically it will be the Public Accounts Committee of Parliament that takes it up and invites people. More importantly, the ARICs, the Audit Report Implementation Committees, are supposed to ensure that the recommendations as captured are being implemented. I think that working hand in hand with the Attorney General, where they have cases people have been intransigent and not delivering what they ought to, we ought to have a lot more prosecutions because, you know, some of this, it is clear that the individuals fail to do what is right, and perhaps there is some back dealing going on that ought to be exposed. So yes, PAC, the ARICs, and some prosecution were necessary, but the Auditor General himself should move to surcharge and retrieve sums of monies that immediately can be retrieved.
Now, I ask this question again in relation to a certain example that was undertaken or by conduct by the Malawian president back in 2021, in which he publicly did admonish and subsequently made a decision to sack, if not dismiss, his own appointees that he thought were responsible after an audit had been undertaken or some findings had been undertaken regarding COVID expenditures as well. What sort of examples or cues should we be taking from that as a country?
Well, absolutely. I mean, and probably our hopes have diminished, and that's why I didn't start from that level. Ordinarily, that's what should have happened. Within 36, 48 hours of the report being out there, you expect your president to call the Minister of Health and whichever other ministers are involved and say, you know what, very disappointed in this. You step aside while we try and find out what exactly happened. I mean, if you look at the overall report showing that 75% of the funding received was not applied to the purpose for which we took it, that's staggering. That's absolutely staggering. So yes, the Malawian president right here on this continent demonstrated that, look, you can have a no-nonsense approach, very robust, to dealing with issues of good governance and anti-corruption. That sets you apart from other, presidents and governments on the continent. I think this is an opportunity for that. It's not too late if His Excellency is so minded to take a very, substantive action on this issue, because the report has too many elements that you wonder whether it's a story you are reading or this is real life. It suggests such a breakdown in systems that it is frightening. And so, yes, I align with the suggestion that that was a good example of what we can do to demonstrate good faith and a strong capacity to deal with issues of corruption in our country.
Despite what you just enumerated, and perhaps your pessimism about actions that could be taken by the president, how would you enjoin him or compel him to take an action based on this report, and how quickly?
Well, I think that, there is still opportunity to strengthen the legacy that our president wants to leave. I think that these are the kind of things that when they happen, if our president were to speak up immediately and say, these are the actions I'm taking, and not maintain certain ministers at a point where the rest of the populace think that, look, things are not going well, things have not been done right, then we will know that we have a strong value system that we are holding high. So I would like to encourage our president and the presidential advisors who are privy and who are paying attention to what is going on at the moment, that please, this report is not one of those things that one should be treating with kids' gloves. The implications of what has gone on there, you don't want to even multiply it across other sectors. Just this one intervention and has been managed seems so terrible. It's almost as if people concluded that there's going to be no accountability. This is free money, so let's do what we want. Otherwise, you cannot explain many of the things that have been captured in the report. There's an opportunity here to show some grit and some capacity to deal with these issues. And so we'll encourage His Excellency and the advisors, please, let's hear your voice. Let's hear you take a substantive action that supports the dealing of the retrieval of these sums and taking punitive actions and against those who have clearly decided to take away what belongs to the people of this country and make benefits where they have not made any work, done any, made any efforts that one could say are commendable. So yes, Mr. President, please hear us.
Now, for you and your other friends, as well as organizations that play in the anti-corruption space, do we have, or ideally, did we have, or do we have the anti-graft laws that could easily have prosecuted individuals or even public office holders who supervise some of these corrupt activities?
Oh, yes, I think that that's one thing that we have said over and over again, that Ghana is a country of laws. The laws governing or covering any issue is there in one form or the other. As we've already pointed out, the Auditor General has immediate powers he could be applying that would begin to make some gains in trying to get persons who have behaved ultra vires the mandate they were given, find them culpable and to have them sanctioned. I don't think that there's a void at all. There's no vacuum of the laws. I think that what there is a lack of is the political will to do what is right, it is the capacity to enforce. We seem to, as a society, hate to do anything to relates with punishment. We don't like sanctioning people around us. We try and find ways of avoiding it. And in my mind, we ought to place a premium on individuals in our society who are able to keep their feet down when such situations arise and say, no, the right thing must be done. People who've done the wrong thing must be punished. It's almost like on our football teams when we used to struggle with having people who could score. You know, you go to a point where you just wish we had people who could score. We need to pay attention to those who can, as it were, occupy public office and put their foot down and say, this nonsense must stop and stop now. And once we have such individuals in place, I think the sanction, so that is where DD excelled. That's where Daniel Domelevo excelled. It's not just come and do the paperwork and then collect my salary at the end of the month and go home, cross my legs and say, me and my family, we are fine. No, there's a greater good that this country must keep in mind, and that our public officers must appreciate that as Ghanaians, we're expecting them to deliver on. Not just collecting your salaries, but making sure that the public good is met. And it means enforcing the laws, sanctioning people, and setting the precedent where they matter most so that others don't begin to continue to think that we can get away with murder.
Okay. We'll also add to the conversation Vitus Azim, former executive director for Ghana Integrity Initiative, also an anti-corruption campaigner himself or activist. But we also do know that keenly captured in that report is that apparently we had paid in excess $81 million of vaccines that had not been delivered with the UNICEF as well as with AVAT. Now, this is the response of the Director General for the Ghana Health Service, Dr. Patrick Kumar-Boaje. We'll have that response for you. And then we'll put all these matters into perspective because $81 million is as much big money within the economic turmoil that we find ourselves trying to negotiate with the International Monetary Fund to get a board agreement, and the bigger subject of prudent use of our own finances of funds, and especially in relation to how COVID funds were used, per the Auditor General's report, special report on COVID expenditures. Patrick Kumar-Boaje, Dr. Patrick Kumar-Boaje is the Director General of the Ghana Health Service.
2021, when vaccine acquisition was a problem for lower middle income countries, most of the vaccines were left for the rich, and we also had the Indian crisis, and so virtually no vaccine. It's true that our AU, through the AVAT mechanism, came out with a package of getting vaccines for African countries. And so Ghana, based on our gaps, we asked for 16.9 million doses to be delivered to us. But in managing vaccine and other logistics, expiry date and storage is extremely important. For the vaccine, it is the cold chain facility. Do you have enough capacity to store all those vaccines in your country? That's one. And if you have them, are you able to deliver them within the period of the expiry of the particular batch that you are getting? So the obvious thing is to secure the quantity you need, stagger the delivery based on space in your cold chain capacity, and that is why it's been staggered. Mind you, at that time too, we had about 20% of our needs being supplied by the COVAX facility, and then soon after that, we also started having some bilateral donations to Ghana, and I think that came to almost about 15 million doses were given to us through donations. So what you do is that you stagger them. We have so far received 6 million plus. The last 1 million was delivered last week in anticipation of the current campaign. And so that's how it's been staggered to be delivered over the period that we needed. Otherwise, if you took all the 16, you will not be able to deliver them and they will expire. And most importantly, we will not have the cold room space to stock all those vaccines in addition to what we already had. So we've not lost any money. What it means is that they will have to now supply us and when we need it. But of course, if we come to a state that I believe they still think that we may not need all that, it can be renegotiated. But that's not for me to decide.
Well, alongside Adam Senanu, we also have been able to have on phone a former executive director for the Ghana Integrity Initiative, an anti-corruption campaigner in his own right, extensively fighting this for decades now. And we do have Vital Azim on the line. Good morning to you, Mr. Vital Azim. Mr. Vital Azim, good morning to you.
Yeah, good morning.
Now, you look at key explanations, for example, being given by the Director General for the Ghana Health Service, etc. But you juxtapose that with within the period of COVID and the concerns that had been raised about the purchase of Sputnik vaccines and the responses of the health minister. And we'll play some of those things subsequently in this interaction. What does it tell you about decisions that are taken by public office holders in relation to funds that come in from donors for the public good?
If we want to be, let's say, generous, we can say that the decisions are not guided by much planning and maybe data. Because we had a lockdown in Ghana for just three weeks, for just 3 areas. So we knew at least we could estimate the extent of the COVID, the pandemic. And so whatever procurements we were making should have been linked to a reasonable estimate of the population that we wanted to have vaccinated. And also considering our country, the attitude of people towards vaccination and all that. Besides, considering our economic situation, one would have expected that we would have negotiated to pay us and when we needed the vaccines. We could place the bulk order, but negotiate to pay from time by installments or something. So one you need to guide, we needed to guide whatever decision we took by better planning. But if you want to be ungenerous, you can say that sometimes people take advantage of these situations for personal benefit. We have an instance of a situation where letterheads were printed for about 99 years or something. So no matter how you look at it, I think that our public leaders, our public office holders are not putting their best in the interest of this country. And so when it comes to the use of public resources,
Mr. Azim.
Hello? Yeah.
Please go ahead. Okay. So there are key questions about the use of discretion by public office holders. In your own experiences over the last 2 decades, trying to fight corruption, would you say that it is because the regulations or the laws or the constitutions or the acts that we have in our country gives public office holders too much discretion, or it is that they undertake activities or actions not for the public good?
The laws give public officers a lot of discretion, but there are countries with such discretions, but the actors act with integrity. Of course, if you say, for example, let me just say, if you say the president can appoint certain people to certain positions, there are countries where the president asks a public service commission to scrutinize, recruit people, and recommend at least 3 people for the president to appoint for a very important position. That is where the law has given discretion to the president, but the president decides to act with integrity in the interest of the nation. In our country, we don't even hear of interviews for such positions. We just hear an announcement on radio of somebody has been appointed to this. We don't know what background checks have been done and all that. So yes, the law can give you a lot of discretion. But if you're a patriotic citizen acting in the national interest, you will act with integrity and try to minimize the negative effects of that discretion that you have been given.
So at
and
which...
that's the problem that we have in this country. Once you have the discretion, you misuse it.
Okay.
Mostly for private interest, although there might also be inefficiencies involved. And that's why sometimes there's need for transparency, there's need for consultation. Because as an individual, you can also make mistakes.
All right. I'll put my next question to the two of you, because on the other side is Edem Senanu. Would you say that the way discretionary powers or decision-making are undertaken by public service office holders, it is because we have a socio-cultural problem, or it is that they just don't know what to do when they are in public office? Let me first start with you, Mr. Vitus Azim, on this question.
Oh, I said the two of you. Can you just repeat that question?
Okay. If you relate how people in the West or public office holders in the West or in advanced countries take decisions because they have discretion, but they take it for public good, and you compare it to what we do here in Ghana and the rest of Africa, is it because we have a socio-cultural or inherent problem, or it is because they just don't have the capacity to occupy those offices and take the right sort of discretionary decisions?
I think it's because we have a socio-cultural problem.
How so?
You see, when you go outside, when Ghanaians go outside the country, they work differently from when they are in this country. So that is one reason why I want to say that it's not because of it is because of a socio-cultural problem, and not because we lack the capacity. Ghanaians outside have risen to certain high levels in those countries, in their professions. So it is just that in Ghana, we see public authority as private authority to be exercised in the interest of the individual and the individual's close associates and maybe political party. That is our problem. And it's also an attitudinal problem. Our attitude towards public institutions, public resources. We think, oh, it's for the public. The government is like somebody sitting there. So you just do what you want and you go scot-free. The other side is we are not held responsible for our actions.
Please hold on there. Same question to you, Mr. Edem Senanu. If you heard my question on the...
Yeah, I had the question.
Great.
Even though I didn't hear Mr. Azim's response, that would have been insightful. But I think that it's really about systems. You take the Ghanaian and send him anywhere else in the world where the systems are working, and he becomes a star. Why does he become a star? He knows very full well that the rigors of the law, full rigors of the law, will be brought to bear if he does something wrong. And in most of our laws, if you take the Public Financial Management Law Act, we borrowed from the best across the globe. So there is no doubt that we have some of the best laws on our books. I think that if we were enforcing, even in terms of discretion, those laws would define the scope within which you could use discretion. And a discretion cannot be arbitrary. And when it is, the systems themselves have opportunity for review, and you can be punished or sanctioned for exercising, arbitrary discretion in a way that does not promote the public good. So I think that bottom line is that in our jurisdiction, the lack of enforcement allows people to think that they can exercise discretion beyond scope and get away with it. If we were enforcing the laws and the sanctions that are available, surcharging people and what have you, you would find that very few people would attempt to, as it were, apply discretion that does not expand or extend what is in the best interest of citizens.
Mr. Vitus Azim, why is it that for those who have been elected into public office, from the president down to his appointed ministers, as well as other public office holders, not necessarily politically exposed public office holders, fail to activate laws of sanction of people who flout regulations as far as graft is concerned?
Well, I think one of the issues is our political system, our partisan nature of all this. For example, if the chief director or the director general of Ghana Education Service or Ghana Health Service is appointed by the president and can be removed by the president at will without any explanation. One, even in considering the person for the appointment, the president would have looked at maybe his contribution to his ruling party, or maybe even his affiliation to the ruling party. So already the fellow is somehow attached to the ruling party and the president. Then he or she is also grateful to the president for that favor done him or her. And thirdly, the fear of being removed. Public service in Ghana is very, very lucrative. The official bungalows, the V8s with drivers and servants around carrying your phones, all those things make people want to stay on and are ready to sacrifice their integrity for that. So that is our main problem. Apart from the fact that I already mentioned that you don't feel responsible for whatever you do, you are not accountable to anybody apart from your appointing authority. So as long as you think that what you do will please the ruling authority, then you go ahead and do it.
Now, I look at all the indiscriminate expenditures that public office holders cannot account for, and chief directors giving very lame responses as captured by the Auditor General. And Mr. Senang, you have to conclude that it looks like all the fights all of you in anti-corruption crusading have been undertaken seem to be fruitless. And it doesn't look like anything is going to stop soon as far as corruption is concerned, does it?
Well, I wouldn't say it is fruitless. I mean, yes,
it is not.
Looks, the situation looks dismal, but I won't say it's fruitless. I'd like to quote the fact that the cost of a thriving democracy is eternal vigilance by the citizens. Good governance is not readily supplied. It must be constantly demanded. What that tells you is that even the little efforts, and little I put it in quotation, that we are making, in the absence of it, you probably would see an acceleration of the kind of rot we do not want to see in this country. So it's better you have a few voices may look dismal, but it is important that we continue this fight. I think that one of the major turning points was when Mr. Daniel Domlovo was exited forcefully because we had gotten a lot of traction. It's one of the reasons why we need to look critically at our constitutional arrangements and make sure that we cut down on the excessive executive influence. Because to the extent that the party in government begins to populate all the other branches of government, be the judiciary, the legislature, and even within the ministries, the public sector. At first, it would just be the minister. Then it became deputy ministers. Then it became chief directors. Then it became information officers. These are now all very often political goons who are pursuing a certain agenda that are not actually aligned with the best interest always of the Ghanaian. So there is work that ought to be done. And if you ask me, a good place to start with in this season will be political party financing and looking at the constitutional arrangements to cut down on the executive influence. That, as it were, undermines the accountability mechanisms that we have in place.
Mr. Vitus Azim, I will protect the public's purse. That's what the president said 7th January 2017. If you look at that statement and you have to make an assessment, almost, I have to say 7 years down the lane, what will be your conclusion of that statement by the president in relation to how he's dealt with corruption, particularly in relation to this special audit on COVID expenditure?
You just need to look at the audit report. We were able to mobilize 21 billion Ghana cedis for COVID expenditure. And when I just read the executive summary and listed 10 expenditures, and only 3 were COVID and health related. Only 3 were health and COVID related. Monies that were meant, or expenditures that have already been provided for in the annual budget of the country, for each of the years, like Get Fund, LEAP, all those things, monies were already allocated to them in the annual budget. And yet, we had to use the COVID funds for these expenditures. Of course, you can say the LEAP is related because of the lockdown. They needed extra money to take care of this. But there are some that you cannot justify as a COVID expenditure or health-related expenditure. Even when you look at the health infrastructure, the agenda 111, can you adequately see that it was COVID-related? Because after all, as a country, as a government, we're supposed to provide hospitals for our country. And in any case, this infrastructure development are not something that you can do in 1 year. Or even the creation of a development bank. Can you imagine that a development bank is a COVID-related expenditure? And then when you do that, and some of these were loans, when you do that and you bring us to this level where we are today, you cannot claim that you're protecting the public purse. Because even as a family, if you are going out to borrow and see that the borrowing is becoming too much, you cannot pay, you stop. You don't continue to borrow, and then at the end of the day, you deprive your children of food. And that's what we're seeing now. Because if you are a pensioner, you have put your money in treasury bills or bonds, government bonds, because we're sure, oh, this is a very reliable source of funding, investment. And then the government can say you cannot take it back. Are you not going to go hungry? Are you protecting the public purse? You are not only failing to protect the public purse, but you're also failing to protect your citizens. And so I don't think there's any truth in what he said. Even he has said, promised as going to eradicate corruption, and he was being described as incorruptible. Can we say that today? Can we continue to blame our economic crisis on the COVID-19? I don't think so.
Mr. Senanu, at whose back does the responsibility stop? And who should take responsibility for this ultimately within the sphere of public office?
Oh, without doubt, it is the president. I mean, we say that leadership is cause. Everything else is effect. Leadership is cause. Everything rises and falls on the back of leadership. And if you do, I mean, in leadership analysis, we say that people elect persons into positions of trust because they want change. They want constructive, positive change. And they get frustrated when they don't see that change. Purely, absolutely, at the backs fall with the president of the nation. And so, yes, if anybody should be paying attention, it's His Excellency Nana Addo Akufo-Addo, who ought to be telling us what is going on and what I'm going to do better about the situation.
Mr. Senanu, were you part of pre-2017, all those advocacy groups occupying? Were you part of any of them?
No, I wasn't part of Occupy Ghana, but my group, Citizens Movement Against Corruption, that were co-chaired, was part of the excitement that Nana Addo was saying we are going to deal with this canker, you know. That political season, 2015-2016, was seriously charged with anti-corruption issues. And we really thought that we were going to see some change.
7 years on, how would you describe the state and consolidation and comprehensiveness of corruption in Ghana on a scale of 0 to 10? Oh, we've lost him. We've lost him. Mr. Vitas Azim.
Yes.
Based on what Mr. Senanu said, he was part of Citizens Movement Against Corruption, and he also itemizes the period 2015-2016 to be at the time, at the height of concerns by anti-graft campaigners for corruption. You compare that to what you've observed the last couple of years, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, and now to today. How would you describe the situation today?
Let me correct you. Campaigners against corruption, not campaigners for corruption.
No problem. Please go ahead.
Yes. So there is no comparison that you can make. It's not even what I say, but the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index says what? I think we got 43. And we have just been hovering around 41, 42, 43. But even if you put this aside, because sometimes they say it's mere perception or that maybe they question the methodology and all that. But the newspaper reports, the complaints, you just need to take a taxi or a trotro and you sit down there and raise one of these questions and the complaints that you get from people. And you know that you just can't compare this to all previous years. And I have said that every new government in this country has been more corrupt than its predecessor. And so the situation is getting bad and getting worse. And we need to pull our brakes on this. And you were asking who's to blame. Of course, we've elected somebody and put him in charge of the people and the resources of this country to manage effectively and efficiently for us. So if that fails, you know who to hold.
Now, you seem disappointed, I have to say. From what you're saying, you seem very disappointed.
Very, very disappointed.
Who should take action next, Mr. Vitus Azim? And what should be the action that needs to be taken immediately, beyond what the Auditor General of Parliament will undertake, based on this report?
The Special Prosecutor said it. We as a country, we are not ready to fight corruption. If we are ready to fight corruption, we must all get involved. If, for example, Roland, somebody sat on your media house, your platform, and called for a demonstration against the government. On the day of the demonstration, how many people came out? How will the government take us serious if we don't give the necessary support to citizen action? So it must start from us. Because you cannot elect people and wait for 4 years to put them on their toes. You must continue to put them on their toes. Through what we say on air, through the criticisms, the press releases, and even through the demonstrations. Ghanaian citizens are not ready to do that.
Mr. Vitus Azim, you didn't buy any of the bonds.
When we do that, then you can talk about the top. Because the top has failed us. And if we also fail ourselves, then we don't know whom to blame.
Mr. Vitus Azim, you didn't buy any of the bonds or the instruments, so you are safe, right?
I am not safe. I am a pensioner. And when I took my 25% bulk payment, first I put it at Windows Bank or investment. Then the government came and said, no, you cannot have your money back. I was able to get a good portion of it. Then I went and put it somewhere else in another bank. And that is where I had a letter from one of the banks saying that your money that was 50,000 is now 39,000. Another bank wrote the same thing, that if I want to take advantage of debt exchange, then I better need to tell them that I think it was last Friday was the deadline or something. I am definitely a victim. And you see, for a government that has been democratically elected, to treat a citizen this way is very painful. If you spread the thing, what if I don't live up to 2025 or 2027 or 2037? What happens to the money? And should I be suffering now and waiting till 2037 to take back what I have sweated for?
Mr. Vitus Azim, I see that you're not in a good place, just like all Ghanaians.
Definitely, we're not in a good place at all. Except the few that continue to enjoy, the few that continue to ride in the VH and take free fuel, live in free government bungalows, and yet they take loans for cars and rent houses.
Vitus Azim. Vitus Azim is a former executive director for Ghana Integrity Initiative, and they have been fighting corruption since Adam. We keep wishing them well. Well, alongside as media, we'll also do the advocacy and hope that ultimately something will change in our country. But this conversation has been on the back of the published reports, special audits undertaken on COVID expenditure between the period March 2020 to June 2022 by the Auditor General. And it says, in conclusion, we got almost approximately 22 billion, that is 21 point something billion Ghana cedis. And by way of expenditure, conclusion of the Auditor General is indicating officers and assigns and political office holders flouted regulations, the Public Financial Management Act, as well as other regulations in those expenditures, leading to losses to the point that currently $81 million paid to UNICEF as well as AVAT for the supply of COVID vaccines are still stuck there. Well, we hope that UNICEF will come and give us some responses, even though we've heard from the Ghana Health Service Director General. But again, it's where we have to do a recall. The president of Malawi back in 2021, based on actions or inactions undertaken by his assigns or officers he's put in place of position, expending COVID funds inappropriately and actions thereof. When we come back, we'll also tell you what the president promised and subsequently a leading member of the governing New Patriotic Party raising concerns about the current state of affairs. Now, the Malawian president.
I can assure you, every one of you, that there is no place on earth where these criminals will hide. The outrage and anguish you all feel from reading this audit report is not only righteous, but also one that I personally feel. And now that the evidence related to the 6.2 billion is before us, I'm taking action. As I speak, over a dozen individuals suspected of committing the crimes exposed by this audit report have just been arrested by the Malawi Police Service. So I want all of the thieves hiding in the civil service to mark my words. If the finger of evidence points to you as one of the thieves that stole COVID money for saving lives while hundreds of our people are dying of COVID, you are going to prison. On top of that, we will use the relevant laws to ensure that you pay back what you stole. Mubwezi, I have directed the Secretary to the President Cabinet, Mr. Zanga Chikosi, to interdict without pay those public officers on whose direct watch the financial mismanagement occurred. As for the Minister of Labor, who was named by the audit report as having spent COVID funds amounting to $613,000 on his allowances for a foreign trip, I have dropped him from my cabinet accordingly. Even though the minister has since returned the money, his usage of the funds means that the money was unavailable for its intended purpose when it was needed most. And I cannot have in my cabinet any individuals who either spend money budgeted for one thing on something else or do not ask tough questions to ensure that the money they are spending on something was budgeted for that purpose. As far as I'm concerned, anyone who steals or wastes public funds is a traitor to this country.
President Chakwera of Malawi, that was in 2021. But 5 years before, this is the promise made by our president when he was being sworn into office at the Black Star Square. President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo.
Are not spoiled for the party that wins an election, but resources for the country's social and economic development. I shall protect the public purse by insisting on value for money in all transactions. Public service is just that, service and not an avenue for making money. Money is to be made in the private sector, not the public, and measures will be put in place to ensure this. We must create wealth and restore happiness to our nation. We can only do this when we have an educated and skilled population that is capable of competing in the global economy. We must expand our horizons and embrace science and technology as critical tools for our development. We believe that the business of government is to govern. Ours is to set fair rules. We will provide vision and direction and shine the light down the path of our entrepreneurs.